One thing I said about the mathematical proposition, or what Descartes said about mathematical proposition, is that even though we might be dreaming in terms of our perception, we still seem to believe in the truth of mathematical proposition because they are not dependent on perception. And one of the things that you said quite rightly, nobody saw a triangle, and the fact that the inner angles of it, the sum of inner angles of a triangle is 180 degrees in Euclidean geometry, we need to qualify that, is not dependent on seeing any triangles. In fact, it doesn't even depend on the existence of an actual three-dimensional triangle. Actually, usually, I mean, not usually, but triangles are two-dimensional, so they don't really exist in the same way that objects of perception exist. But that makes it all the more certain. Because it is the construction of our thinking rather than something that we perceive from the external world. That makes it more reliable. And it is important to understand that Descartes only continues to doubt the truth of mathematical proposition is not because we as human beings make mistakes through our perception, but he entertains the possibility of an all-powerful, deceitful being deceiving him. So he wants to take doubt to absolute extreme, including mathematical proposition, and then proves that he exists, that I exist, and therefore that's the basic certainty. But then what happens is, once he proves in his mind, at least, or in the meditation, the existence of God or the idea of God, and hence God exists as the cause of that idea, then he recuperates mathematical propositions, because the reason he doubted mathematical propositions was because of the evil genius. So evil genius somehow is gone, and mathematical propositions are true.
I have a question.
Sure.
Sir. I was reading, when I was working on this paper, I was trying to understand the argument for the existence of God. And I think I brought this up before, but I read about something, it was called like that people had actually labeled his argument as circular, relating to his proof of God. And I wanted to know, just to clarify, so are we criticizing his perspective and saying that his argument is circular and that it's kind of, I don't know.
But of course, you are certainly free to criticize his perspective. All I'm trying to do here is to explain his reasoning. So it's your judgment. I personally, if it is a personal issue, I personally don't think that the proof is particularly convincing, because he operates with the idea of a clear and distinct idea of God. Now, I'm not sure that is circular as much as he might be assuming the existence of a clear and distinct idea of God. Now, the question is whether we do, in fact, have a clear and distinct idea of God. And if human reason, like you can legitimately ask, I think, to Descartes, okay, if we all have a clear and distinct idea of God, why before a certain period in history, people didn't think of an existence of a mono God, just one God, because it was perfectly consistent for them to have more than one God. So the invention of monotheism is historically a specific time. So before that, people didn't seem to have that clear and distinct idea, or at least they were not aware of the fact that they had a clear and distinct idea. Now, he relies on this, something that we discussed with Plato too. You really need, and you can only tolerate, and you can only operate with one God. More than one God really doesn't seem to fit our theological reasoning. Whether that's true or not, that's what Descartes believes. Therefore, once he assumes the existence of the clear and distinct idea of God, then yes, then he has this additional idea that cause has to be greater than the effect, and God must be the cause of the idea of God in our heads, which, well, it's not very, did anybody like after reading this sort of say, oh, okay, Descartes, then I'm going to start believing in God? I don't think it's very likely. I think for him, it's really methodological, and I try to explain it. This is not a theological argument primarily, or it's not a good theological argument, but it is a methodological argument in which he proves in his mind that mathematical propositions can be trusted. So I try to explain that in terms of Descartes is we trust that our reasoning of the world really belongs to the world. We really, when we make mathematical calculations, especially in the 21st century, with respect to the universe, somehow we think and trust that the universe is really how we calculate it. We trust those calculations. And then we publish papers and make speeches in which we say, this is the structure of the universe as we understand it. And that we also additionally believe that even though our senses might deceive us, our calculations do not. So in the protocol, you talk a little bit about the idea of sun, and that's, Connor, I think, is going to read that. There, this comes clear. So circular, yeah, it might be considered to be circular. I mean, I'll leave that, to you. Like, you need to think for yourself to make those kinds of determinations. For our purposes, it's only important to understand what he is saying, even though he might not be convincing. Is that clear, Riley?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just leave it up to you. So, I mean, if you say circular, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. It's just that I don't want to teach that as a kind of standard argument.
Yeah, and I think that my question wasn't very clear. Yeah, but that definitely helps. And when you said that it was more of a methodological thing than a theological thing, that makes a lot more sense.
Well, just for our purposes, I mean, it really doesn't matter if we believe in Descartes or not, or whether whether he was right or wrong. I mean, he died like 400 years ago. Who cares? But if we understand the argument, that can help us to see what is happening, especially not only with respect to Descartes, but what is happening in our calculations, in our scientific studies today. That is important because, when somebody, I mean, I don't know, like, if somebody says, I've seen a lot of people getting sick during Corona, that statement, as opposed to 4% of the people are getting sick during this pandemic. I think the second sentence gives you much more confidence and much more sort of reliable information, because rather than relying on somebody's anecdotal evidence, you are relying on some calculations, some statistical analysis. I do, and then I say, oh, well, what are the chances that I might die of this? Well, I mean, if I see a bunch of people dying around me, I might start being scared, etc. But then if I realize that this is only 4% of the population, I was like, oh, okay, I have a 4% of dying from blah, blah. So again, none of them proves anything, but in terms of our approach, we seem to be relying on calculations more than people's perception. Therefore, anecdotal evidence, speaking out of your experience, they are much more effective maybe emotionally, but not much less reliable. Therefore, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you think, of course, but perhaps calculation gives us more confidence. Now, a lot of social scientists who are engaged in sort of non-statistical but phenomenological analysis, the anthropologists, for example, who engage with ethnography, which is not really quantifiable, etc., they produce knowledge in one way, and the reality is perhaps we are relying on statistical analysis more.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I got to in my paper was that Descartes seems to be more of a builder, and he's kind of takes in like an incrementalist approach. But then Socrates, even though they both have this extreme doubt, then Socrates is kind of piecing apart arguments, and he kind of comes back to his place of doubt.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure. If you said that in your paper, that's cool.
Yeah, but we'll have to see, how the cookie crumbles, whether or not it's valid. So I won't get too cocky yet.
Okay, well, don't, but it's fine. Nothing you said so far is problematic. So. Okay, Connor, are you continuing?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
On Thursday, we started with meditation 3. We started by talking about his conclusion of I am a thing that thinks, which is different from I think, therefore I am. This causes the I to become an object. We advance into the thought of our perception of the world as a way of thinking. Our perception of the outer world comes from within. The idea is that only I exist, nothing else around me does. The next idea we discussed was I see something and then produce the idea. An example of this that we discussed is the sun. Our senses make us think that the sun is tiny because when we look at it, it appears that it can fit in our hands. However, science tells us that it is much larger than the earth. This is an example of how we have changed to think based on calculations due to proof of theory. We also discussed this as a reason not to trust the senses. Our senses give us a false perception due to being a small, imperfect human being. However, you can still make mathematical errors due to a mistake. Here we added the idea. Descartes wants God to restore faith of mathematical propositions. Even if God did this, however, it would not cover the senses. Our senses would still mislead us to making a mistake.
Okay, that seems a little bit confusing, but I think I get what you are saying. So it's not just so much that we make, I mean, obviously all of us make errors with respect to mathematical calculations, but we never really think that mathematical calculations themselves are wrong. I mean, I might say 2 plus 2 is 5 and I might be wrong, but once 2 plus 2 is 4, I don't doubt that. And that's why he introduces the possibility of an evil genius. Okay.
We also compared Socrates and Descartes as well. We see through Descartes that he believes in the certainty of law. He believes the law is the truth, while Socrates always questioned everything and especially the law. He never really imagined proof to be possible. He thought that being of faith and using that was the answer.
Okay, so when you, it's really easy when you pronounce Descartes, just don't pronounce the S's and you'll be fine. Just ignore the S's in the word, then you'll be cool. So it's easy, yeah.
We then discussed objective and formal reality. Objective reality is reality within your mind. Formal reality is what causes the object. It is the reality of the thing outside of us. An example was the idea of God is an objective reality. We question God and his existence because of our advancements in technology. They have given us new knowledge that goes against the historically Christian ideas. We finish up with discussing how Descartes wants to achieve perfection. He believes it is possible for him to achieve this because God created him. He believes God created him in his image, so he has the potential to be perfect. This is a sign of arrogance from Descartes. We have seen what appears to be arrogance from him different times throughout the readings. We believe that we should be more understanding and not take on this amount of arrogance, claiming that I can and will be perfect because God created me.
Okay, good. Thank you. Just wanted to say something about the last point. He knows he's not perfect, and he probably also believes that human knowledge is never going to be perfect, as much as it might be certain, but in terms of its comprehension, I'm not really sure that he thinks that it's going to be comprehensive, to comprehend everything. But what we were trying to discuss there, and you can go look up the film as well, if I believe that I am created by a perfect being, and that being somehow imprinted that idea in me, there is a certain understanding of yourself as what I would consider slightly arrogant, because I am, whatever I am created by a perfect being. And somehow we cannot think of God outside of this perfection. Now, whether you believe it in God or not, that notion carries over to science as well, in the sense that our universe has a perfect order which can be known by human beings. And I think that's really our trouble of thinking things as they are, rather than ideally how we are somehow thinking of them to be. So that was the arrogant part. It gives us a lot of pressure. If you are created by a perfect being, then that, and it carries its signature in you somehow through an idea, that somehow for Descartes at least enables the possibility of perfect knowledge of the universe. There is something, some order, some structure, something to be known, rather than thinking the universe as just simply complete random and not so great configuration of beings. I mean, we still use this argument for intelligent design, etc. We believe that it is somehow intelligent, whereas the design might be completely stupid. But we look around and see perfection. So isn't it wonderful that human beings give birth? No. Isn't it wonderful like there are beautiful flowers? Not really. Isn't it like no, it's just like our understanding and attribution of it to what is happening, as if everything is working like a perfectly organized watch or something, which is, it's not. So, and once our universe disappears or our planet disappears, then we will no longer believe that. Which science also tells us it's a distinct possibility. So, okay, any questions, any issues? Okay, so rather than continuing with Kant, I want to stop here. You don't say, oh, you should not have done that. But for human beings, somebody does something and we say, you should not do it. You should not have done that. How is that even possible? How is that even possible that we tell somebody that they should not have done what they already did? It's a very simple and deceptively tricky question. We say, you know, you submitted your paper, you submitted it late, you should not have done that. It's like, I already did it. What are we talking about? And you, well, just push this example a little too extreme. Like you kill, no, don't kill. You slap somebody. And I already did it. Like, you should not have done that. That's wrong. Well, it happened. How can it be wrong? I did it. But you should not have done it. Where is this coming from? What do we have in mind when we say something like that? Isao, go ahead.
Like your morality, and like tells you like you try not to like repeat it.
Okay, but there is a reason why I did it, right? There was a cause. And everything in nature happens according to causes and according to laws. So yes, I will not do it if those causes don't exist at that time. But if they do, I'm just going to do it. Because there's a little bit, like, make it a little bit, I don't know whether more complicated or less complicated, but there are conditions under which something happens. And therefore, we always say, like, oh, everything depends on its circumstances. We just say, well, in that case, you might have slapped, but in that case, don't slap. That slapping is right, that slapping is wrong, etc. We can make all these, like, circumstantial distinctions, and we even recognize this in the law. But we also have an additional inclination, when, or sort of thought, when we say these circumstances is sufficiently close to these circumstances such that it offends our sense of justice, when in which case we punish this person and we don't punish that person. So we say, well, if you slap somebody, and if you are a white person, then you'll get away with it. But if you slap that, and if you are a sort of non-white person, then you'll be punished. And that's wrong. That should not happen, we say. But it is happening. I mean, there is clear racism in society, and these kinds of injustices are happening. So the question is, how do we say that? On what basis do we say that? What is the principle according to which you are operating?
The expectation of equality.
Expectation of equality. Now, let me ask you this. You live in a country where individuality, difference, specialness, uniqueness is so glorified. Like, I am one of a kind. I am so very different than anybody else. You believe that, right? You believe everybody is unique and you are one in the entire universe, and you are, I mean, we all do. We are just like, only me. There's only one of me. I am so special. And my combination of experiences are so unique to a certain extent that people cannot even possibly understand me unless they would be me. We believe that. We sell products on the basis of that. Limited editions of blah, blah. Like, you, by buying those configuration of things, you need to feel special. You need to be special. You need to believe you are special. Now, how is that compatible with the idea that we are actually all equal? Not just similar, not just, resembling, but equal. How is that compatible? Do you believe that you are genuinely equal to anybody else?
I think part of it comes from a place of knowing that, like, you'll never really, like, understand or know someone else and, like, be able to objectively, like, weigh the good things and the bad things about them or something. And so from there, like, recognizing that that's something that is unreachable, then, like, the next possible thing is to give everyone this, like, clear basis of equality. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, both of them make sense separately, but together I'm having issues that, yes, whatever I do, you are never in a position to judge me. Now, is that a tenable, acceptable idea? If somebody would say, yeah, I killed 25 people and ate them, but that's my experience. It's unique to me. You can never understand me. You cannot judge me. That, I mean, I'm giving, of course, a sort of easy kind of hyperbolic example, but you cannot just say, oh, you are so special. We can't possibly understand why you do these horrible things. We just accept you in your individual uniqueness as you are. No, not at all. And then the question is, why is it that we are so obsessed in emphasizing the belief that we can never understand each other? Like I have specialness. It's just me. It belongs to me. Nobody can possibly understand this. Now, this is a trend. This is not a fact. This is a historical development where people constantly search and ascertain their absolute uniqueness. It's like, you can never understand me. That would be a horrible existence for any human being if nobody can understand them. Why is it that we do this? Why is it that we believe that that should be our norm? Why can't I accept the fact I'm just an ordinary person, not so special, with experiences that are fairly similar to other people, and on the basis of that we can form a community rather than me constantly proving to them that I am so special and different.
I feel like maybe it's because we want to feel unique. And if we can feel unique, we can feel like us existing means something.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. Excellent point. Now, why is it then when we feel unique that existence is special? Because I am very lonely. Nobody understands me. I am extremely alone, and I have such special thoughts, ideas, experiences that no one can possibly have it. That seems to me, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, like, when something's a commodity, people are more likely to want it. So, like, if you're one of a kind, people are more likely to want to value you and, like, hear from you. So maybe we tell ourselves that, like, no one else can understand me, so we want to think that people are more likely to want to know us for that reason.
I think there's also a religious aspect.
The what?
I think that religion also plays a role, because if you're told from the time that you're a child that there's this amazing perfect being, and we touched on this kind of already, that there's this perfect being, and that he's created all this stuff and he has all these powers, and that when you die, that as long as you obey his like commands, that you're going to go and be in this place of like supreme pleasure, and all your dead relatives are going to be there, which sounds crowded in my opinion, but anyway, that I think that kind of builds up your ego and makes you feel like you're something that you're not, it makes it hard to recognize that you walk amongst like your peers, and that you're not really one, however many people have ever existed.
So you think religion contributes to that in terms of our unique human being? Sure, but maybe I want you to, sure, you should, in terms of your religion, people are of different religion, having different, Christianity might articulate like that, and Islam might articulate other way, or Judaism. Yes, maybe there is a sort of unique creation of God. God gave you like a unique face, etc. Unless you are a twin, in which case it's more complicated. But you are still one of a kind. But then, while at the same time we believe this kind of uniqueness, we don't really be treated in many other aspects of society. Oh, Maya is a twin. Perfect. We don't want to be treated as different. Like if somebody were to say, well, Riley, you, as a result of various factors, you seem to believe that you are so unique. So we are just going to make a special law for you. And if you do something, you are going to be punished in a way the others are not, because you are special. And if somebody says, okay, since you are special, you submitted your paper late, so you're going to get a D, while the others are going to be graded out of B. Because you are special, it's just for you. I don't want that either. I want to be, in many respects, just like everybody else. I come to the United States, I want to be treated like every American. I don't want to be treated special. I don't want to be treated as a foreigner. I don't want to be treated as, even though I am, I don't want this. I want to be equal to other people. Yes, maybe in my personal life, I want certain privileges, brands, certain properties that only belong to me and don't belong to other people. It's really kind of construction of ourselves in terms of this idea of private property. I'm a brand, I'm unique, I'm not like anybody else, etc. But when we are talking about the question of social justice, and if we talk about this personally, then it makes it almost impossible to understand what is at stake, because equality is not, certainly not sameness. We don't have to be the same to be equal. Equality is always under a aspect. Like equality under what? I want equality under the law. I want everybody treated equally under the law. Do we?
Yeah, but it's kind of different though from
Why?
what you're saying. So in the example of you being treated like any other American, equality, yeah, it doesn't, I think it's different from, say, equity, because what you might need to be treated like every other American, there might need to be more resources devoted to you in particular, so that your ability to have what any other American would be able to have might be different. So the end result is that you both have the same opportunity. But
well, we didn't come to that. You're absolutely right. But we didn't come to that yet. I am not saying like, I want to have all the sort of privileges of all the Americans, like, you know, Bill Gates or something like that. All I'm saying is that we need to clarify under what conditions I claim equality. And yes, I do expect when I go to a court of law, I want to be treated exactly the same way as Bill Gates would be treated. That's equality under the law. And I appeal to this principle, and I appeal to your reason that you should accept this principle. Kant does, not me. So that's the issue. I don't want to be the same as Bill Gates. I don't want every opportunity as he had or something like that. But politically, I don't want his vote to count 5, while mine counts as 1. I don't want, you know, some other privileged person in society, when they cast their vote, it should be 100 votes as opposed to mine. I want all votes to be 1, because that's equality under the law. When I go to the court, I want to have the same protection, the same treatment as any other person in society. Now, what we do, and that's our sort of dilemma and problem, is we create certain privileges in society. And we create those privileges in order to ascertain our individuality. And make no mistake, all of us want those privileges. Every one of you, in one way or another, is working for that privilege. Now, of course, the term privilege is politically very problematic nowadays, but that's really what it is. The problem is when you translate that privilege into areas that it should not be translated. The law, the treatment by the police, the opportunities in society. So we are struggling with this conceptual distinction, is that what is it that we can clearly talk about equality under the law and under many other things? We are just talking about the law because that makes sense the most to you. Like you say, oh, under the law, of course we should all be treated equally. But what else? Should we all have the same political power? Should we all have the same economic power? Is it possible to create a genuine equality in a society where you don't have economic equality. Because you know, even though in part of your mind you believe, yes, you should be treated equally as Bill Gates in the court of law. But at the same time, like the other idea of the sun, you know I'm not going to be, right? Because he's going to be hired the team of the best lawyers in the country, and I'm probably going to have a public defendant. So what are we talking about when we ascertain equality, while at the same time, economically, we recognize that equality is impossible to achieve? So we say, yes, it should be the case, and we hold on to that principle, while at the same time, no, it's not going to be the case. So if we are thinking about problems in our society, we need to think about this tension between what we all know to be the case. So of course, I'm giving an extreme example. I can also give the example very easily. If you are a European descendant in the United States, your chances of in the court is not the same if you are an African descendant in the United States. You know this, but you also know it to be not, that it should not be the case. Now, why does it fail to be this? It could be economic reasons, political reasons, social reasons. And this is really what we are talking about in terms of social justice. But this concept is very difficult to reconcile with our consumerist perception of ourselves as, I am the unique product. In fact, when you look at I mean, you don't use Facebook, I assume, nowadays, but if you look at my Instagram account, for example, it's absolutely fashioned uniquely. Yet, you go on social media, you see millions and millions and millions of accounts which look exactly the same, with some variations of the angle of the photograph and things like that. So this is our tension. This is what Kant thinks about the aspect of morality that somehow appeals to our reason. And I, as an educator, as a philosopher, believe that all human beings, the worst kinds too, at least have the possibility, the power to understand morality from a rational perspective. And I'm not really ready to give up on people that they are, oh, you are so stupid, you can't possibly understand that. Not at all. Yes, that might empirically be the case depending on your position. But principally, in terms of rational principle, all human beings have this capacity to think. And that's on the basis of which Kant is going to build his moral philosophy and principle according to which we should act. So that's, like, to me, like a direct connection to questions of social justice and what we are reading when we are reading a text that is published in the 18th century, maybe 19th century. I don't know. Yeah, 18th century. Okay, I need to hear your thoughts. So I'll take a break so that you gather your thoughts and come back ready to contribute to this discussion. And you read the first 17 pages of and if you didn't, you have roughly 14 minutes in which you can read it. And come back, and then we'll continue our discussion. So I'll take a break until, what time is it? What time is it?
9:30.
9:45, okay? Okay, so we are officially moving to Kant's Grounding for Metaphysics of Morals, and I want to spend a few moments on the preface the distinction that he makes with respect to three sciences and their material and formal side. Excuse me. So he says ancient Greek philosophy was divided into three sciences: physics, ethics, and logic. So, of course, in this essay, we are going to concentrate on ethics. So ethics, what he considers to be practical moral philosophy, and I tried to touch upon that with respect to this notion, what should be the case, what ought to be the case. So this is a particular human capacity, cognitive capacity, that I would call imagination and reason. The reason that I say imagination, even though Kant always talks about reason, is that imagining something that is differently, that is a human imagination that is unique to human beings, and therefore that capacity allows us to talk about morality. Something is the case. Only a rational being with imagination has the possibility of saying what is the case, should or should not be the case. Therefore, a rational being can somehow determine, as somebody said, future actions in a different way than what is prescribed by nature. Because physics studies nature. Now here, it's an ancient Greek philosophical distinction, but even up to Kant, when you say it's physics, that really means all the physical sciences, all the hard sciences. That would include chemistry, biology, biochemistry, physicobiology, physicochemistry, whatever combination that you can think of, that kind of hard sciences that study nature. Now with Descartes, we know that they study nature on the basis of first mathematics, calculation, that way of understanding, and also maybe secondarily in terms of observation. Now, Kant is going to talk about empirical sciences. Empiricism really means based on sense perception. We observe something, we calculate it, we sort of statistically correlate those, etc., and come to a kind of conclusion. That is two parts, he says, material, namely it is concerned with objects. But there is also rational, formal part of physics. Now, I'm not really sure he gives a explicit or understandable example, but what would be a formal part of physics? About thinking, about the logic of physics rather than its practical study. Who is the scientist? Who studies science? Josh, what are you studying?
I study biology.
Okay. That's a science. So what is a formal aspect of science?
What do you mean by a formal aspect?
Something that is a logic of scientific thinking, not a knowledge that comes from empirical observation.
I guess the scientific method, does that fit what you're looking for?
Scientific method would certainly be the first step to think about that. For example, when you study something in biology, in chemistry, or even in physics, when you observe something, a particular chemical reaction or a particular mutation, etc., or gravitation, etc., you assume that is the result of a certain cause. Because somehow in our formal thinking, scientific thinking, we think every event has a cause. Therefore, we search for an empirical explanation because there must be something that caused it. No scientist would say, yeah, that happens. Well, it sometimes happens. That's kind of cool. And it's interesting, but we have no idea why and we don't care. I mean, of course, there are certain parts of, you know, any science, I believe that you say that, but science is the belief that every event has a cause and we can find the causes. But I haven't searched empirically every event in order to determine whether it has a cause yet, but I assume that every event has a cause. That's a formal way of thinking. That's about the logic of scientific method that doesn't concern the content, what he claims the material aspect of it. Is that clear? If it is not clear, please ask questions. Now, ethics will come in a moment. Logic is pure forms of thinking. Like, you know, if you studied logic, symbolic logic, or formal logic, there are certain rules about thinking that cannot be empirically studied or changed. For example, if you have a proposition, it's either raining or not raining. One of them must be true. So that's contradiction otherwise, either A or not A. Whatever you are thinking, in whatever context, in whatever material aspect you are thinking, that is the way human logic, human mind functions. So that's not the study of this book either. But what he studies is the empirical part of ethics. How do people behave? What do they do? You can call that, actually he calls that anthropology, you know, certain inclinations, customs, habits of certain cultures. We study them. We look at them. What do they do? In some cultures, people marry at this and that, blah, blah, whatever you say. They give gifts to each other, but then they don't reciprocate, but sometimes they reciprocate. You study all these different ethnographical differences empirically in terms of human practical life. From a certain scientific perspective, if you can quantify those, the better, but sometimes you don't, you shouldn't. In fact, you need to engage more in a qualitative analysis of certain structures. But Kant also says that there is a formal aspect of ethics, namely the way in which we think about ethics and the way in which our reason thinks about morality. Now, in this belief, Kant is pretty, you know, different than previous philosophers because he believes that there is a formal, logical aspect of practical moral thinking, just like physics. A lot of people don't. A lot of people say, oh, it's just empirical. Whatever your morality is the result of your culture, your society, your family, your empirical historical conditions. That's the only thing that we study. Like, what do people do? Like in the United States, people believe this, therefore they have these laws, and they define morality is that. What is moral in the United States might be completely immoral in another society. Therefore, we study these empirical differences between societies. A lot of people think that that's it. There is really nothing beyond that in terms of which we as human beings can come up with. Kant is not one of them. Kant believes that there is a formal aspect of moral thinking, logical aspect of moral thinking. And every human being, by virtue of having reason, namely the capacity, the ability, the possibility, the potentiality to think, they participate in this. Nobody is excluded because of their culture, history, context, etc. So he first starts with this idea of equality on the basis of why should we even be equal? What is the principle according to which you all somehow believe, I hope, that everybody, if possible, ought to, no, they are not, but if possible, everybody should be equal. Now, not the same, but equal. It offends our reason of justice that some people are treated differently than others. And it's not because we are Americans. It's not because we are in the 21st century. We are human beings. Something formal and rational and logical in this that should be accepted by all human beings. Now, a lot of people might not accept that. I'm pretty sure Bill Gates should not accept the fact that he should be treated the same way that I am, because he believes that he has certain privileges. He made a lot of money for a lot of people. He supports a lot of families by giving them jobs. Therefore, he should be treated differently. Now, you can believe that too, because that's an empirical fact. But if you ask to Bill Gates, well, what if you were in my condition, and if I were in your condition, would you believe that? The chances that he wouldn't. Because you might think out of your privilege, but you can also think as a human being and say, if I were in that position, because for better or for worse, we talk to each other because we operate with the assumption that you have imagination enough not to be fully me, but at least understand me. You can put yourself into my position. You can think from my perspective. That doesn't mean you will understand all the empirical conditions that are peculiar to me. It just means that human beings have this capacity to logically, rationally, reasonably empathize with each other, not just emotionally. Yes, if I can imagine myself, yes, it's just an imagination and it is weak, it is not perfect, it is not, but on the basis of that, we build coalitions, we build solidarity, we build communities. We communicate with each other, we operate with each other, we actually go protest with each other, we do certain political things on the basis of that commonality, and we rely on that commonality. At least some people can understand, if not me personally, my predicament as a human being. And that imagination is based on the fact that we are all potentially rational. Namely, we have the power to think. Therefore, when we talk to each other, when I'm talking to you, I'm not operating, oh, they'll never understand me. I'm so like, phew, philosopher. I mean, these first years, they can't possibly understand what I'm saying. I don't think that, because that's ridiculous. So I don't sort of think, oh, nobody can understand me. I'm so like one of a kind. All the words that I'm using are of English language, which I learned when I was like 10 years old. So I wasn't like born into this to begin with. So it would be very arrogant for me to think that, oh, I cannot possibly be understood. I'm so unique that no one in the world can understand me, while I'm using the English language that I neither invented nor even had a mastery of. So we have this potential, the power. Yes, empirically, in terms of circumstances, some people can do it, some people cannot. But we all operate with the assumption that everybody potentially can. That is what it means to be human being. Now, there's a different kind of dignity attributed to human being. That dignity is not particular to any individual. It is not privilege. It is not at the exclusion of other people. It is a dignity that's attributed to all human beings, to everybody. Even the people that you hate the most, even the people that you find despicable. If they are human beings. Now, you should continue finding them despicable, I don't care. But as a human being, you operate with the assumption that they have that capacity. That's what he's investigating. Is there something here in terms of how people think, in terms of practical affairs? And can I somehow formally understand these? Now, it may turn out that you might not agree with Kant. You might find him like completely useless and not, you might not agree with him. But it is really a worthwhile activity to investigate with him, because we actually implicitly operate with the assumption that he is discussing. When you say equality, when you believe in justice, when you believe that it is wrong for the same crime, one person gets away and the other person is punished. That somehow offends your sense of justice, and you don't need to claim a privilege like, oh, I'm American, therefore it offends my sense of justice. No, this is a human dignity. This is a human sense of justice. You cannot claim it just for yourself. I mean, we do that a lot, especially in the United States. Like, we are so special. Our Constitution is so special. Our founding fathers are so special. We are a unique experiment, unlike other nations, etc. This is all claiming privilege for the Americanness. You can actually do all of these things on the basis of reason. I'm not ethically, morally, in any way superior to a Turkish person, to a Chinese person, to a Korean person, to a blah, blah person. But we all, as human beings, have this sense of justice. Now, this is going to be very minimal. It's going to be very painstakingly difficult to figure out what that dignity consists of. But that's really what makes it interesting, because this is not just giving easy answers. Oh, we are all human beings. It's wonderful. We should treat each other as human beings. No, that's not even true empirically. We need to clarify what these principles actually are, according to which human beings have the capacity to operate. Okay, does that make sense so far? Am I going too fast? Any unclear points? Now, one thing that we can glean from what he calls anthropology is that human beings make laws. We make laws. That is our desire to control the future. We just say, nobody is going to drive on the left-hand side of the street. Well, at least, in non-British colonies in Britain. So we are all going to drive from the right-hand side of the street. Now, no other creature makes a law and gives a law to itself. Lions don't say, well, we are not going to, it is forbidden to hunt here anymore. I mean, it's not forbidden. It's not allowed here anymore, right? They don't say that. And the fox doesn't say, I ate that cat, but I shouldn't really have done that. From now on, I'm not going to eat cats. And all the other foxes are not going to eat cats. Because we believe animals who do not have the same rational capacity, I'm not saying at all, but at least not the same rational capacity as human beings, do not give law unto themselves. And that is a question of judgment. That's a question, the power of judgment. What does that mean? I judge something to be different than what it is. Because if judgment was simply restricted to what is, we would be just like every other creature following the laws of nature. We would say, if something happens, it happens for a reason. It happens for a cause. And I'm not that cause, therefore it will happen. So that's human capacity, which has to say, it is a duty. I should not do that. And he starts this on page 2. Everyone must admit that if a law is to be morally valid, is to be valid as a ground for obligation, then it must carry with it absolute necessity. So if it doesn't carry an absolute necessity, then it's not really a moral law. It's just a human law, like political law. For example, when you say something like this, let's just use an example that people, contemporary society, talk about. I see a lot of memes on Facebook and says, you know, segregation was a law, slavery was a law. That doesn't mean that they were moral. Now, do we or do we not say when slavery was the law, it was wrong? It wasn't just wrong at that time, it was always wrong. Despite the fact that a law exists that made slavery legal, it has never made it moral. Even then, it was immoral. You don't say, oh, well, those people had different kind of morality, therefore their moralness was different than mine, therefore, no, it was always wrong, because we believe, in terms of human dignity, no human being should be the property of another human being. This was morally wrong, not just after 1865. It was morally wrong in 500 before Christ. It was universal. It was always wrong. Now, the fact that we allowed it doesn't make it moral. Now, there you are not saying morality changes. You are just saying human laws change. So there is no point at which you can say, well, I understand that slavery was acceptable at the time. No, you don't. It was never acceptable. It's just there were some laws. And that's the difference between the formal part, because otherwise you wouldn't have any reason or any basis to judge. You cannot judge anything because it was the circumstances of the time and that was the case, what can I do, etc. No, when you make a judgment as a rational being, you operate with the assumption slavery was wrong for all human beings at all times. The fact that we might have done it, that we did, the fact that we have done it, did never make it right. It was always wrong. And that's the law that Kant is after. What is always wrong? How should I always act? Because he believes the empirical circumstances change. You know, American economy is not based on a literal sense of slavery anymore. It's based on a different kind of exploitation. So circumstances change, people change, judgments change, sort of practices change, etc. But is there a principle that you can think of that you should always do it or you should never do it regardless of circumstances? That's what Kant is after. That's what Kant is trying to find as a formal principle that will give an a priori, namely prior to experience, prior to any determination. Do you really need an experience? I mean, all of you are born after the slavery was formally abolished. Do you really need an experience to judge that slavery was wrong? Would anybody say, let me look and see how did it work? Maybe I'm going to judge accordingly. No, you just judge it because you imagine what it means to be owned by another person. And that as a principle is unacceptable. Everything that is based on that unacceptable principle is wrong. You don't need experience. Nobody says like, oh, you cannot possibly understand slavery. Yes, of course, I will never be able to understand what it means to be a slave, but I will always understand that it was wrong, that it was an unfair, unjust principle or a law. So that's human imagination. What we are judging is not the experience, we are judging the principle. And we say that a law, that if it is morally valid, it should be valid as an absolute ground for obligation. So this principle should be a priori, prior to experience, which means independent of all experience. And that's really crucial for a rational principle to be independent of the circumstances. Regardless, you can bring any kind of, try to bring any kind of empirical justification. You can never justify slavery. You can never make it morally acceptable, because the judgment is independent of experience, independent of history, independent of circumstances. It has and will always be morally wrong. That's what Kant is after. So that's the criterion according to which he is judging the principle. So only a rational human being has a capacity to give a priori laws to itself. This is power of judgment, and that's what he is investigating here. So this is the preface. Is that clear? Any questions? No questions?
Clarify that. So like the principle is like, what is it that like always right and wrong, regardless of the experience? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And when we say experience, we say every time, anytime, outside of time, it's always the case. And circumstance, wherever you are, in whatever century, whatever country, whatever culture, whatever anything, they are independent of all those kind of experiences. By experience, I mean spatio-temporal circumstance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So it's not my experience, but like the experience of like human, or
all experience. Like, it is of all experience.
Got it.
You know, because if we talk a lot about this notion of privilege in the United States, but one way of understanding the notion of privilege is making laws on the basis of your circumstances. You claim that your experience somehow is special. And we do that. We do that explicitly. It says, oh, we came to a new continent with Mayflower, and our experienced circumstances were so special, we made a law. And on the basis of which we claim, I mean, when we say we, I'm really talking about the United States, claims of moral superiority. That is the definition of privilege, thinking that your experience is justifiably the basis of the laws that you determine for the rest of humanity who live in the United States. So implicitly, we do have this idea that, no, you should not base this on experience. This should be potentially true for all human beings who happen to live here at this time. I mean, that's still a circumstance. But if it is moral, it should be true for all human beings at all times. It should be absolutely necessary, not relatively necessary. Because anything that is relatively necessary, so I consider to, I should do my homework. Well, that only applies to people who have homeworks. I should never lie. That only applies to people who have something to say. That only applies to people who can speak. That only applies to, I should not kill. That only applies who those who have the privilege of living in a peaceful setting. If you are in a war, you will kill. So no principle can actually be valid for all human beings at all times if it comes from certain circumstances. Then I always privilege my experience. Then I say, oh, well, I don't kill, nobody should kill. Well, because you live in your home very comfortably. You are not at the war, so don't speak for all human beings. So whenever we try to universalize, make our own experience universal, that is really called, that's really the definition of colonialism. That's the definition of colonizing the entire world in terms of your ideas. Like believing, oh, Christianity is true, so I should spread it around everywhere. That's the definition of believing that your circumstances gives you the truth and you can universalize that to all human beings. So what Kant is after is a universal that doesn't come out of any circumstance. No group of people can claim any sort of privilege for that. It doesn't belong to any human kind. So even historically, like believing that, oh, we are superior now to previous generations. We always believe that, which is also very problematic to think that you are morally superior to previous generations. Okay, so, but how do we do that? How do we determine that an action can be moral or not? How do we say what I do as a human being, whether it is moral or not? Now, one implication of this idea is that the circumstances do not determine the morality of your action. Therefore, the consequences of your action should not really determine whether it is moral or not. The logic here is the following. So, when I sort of shoot into a crowd, and is that moral? Or if you live in Richmond, if you drive your car into a group of people, which happened in Richmond a couple of days ago, is that moral? What if somebody says, well, it's not as bad because I didn't really kill anybody? Well, that's a circumstance that's not necessary. Oh, no, you have something?
Quick side note, I was there a couple feet away and one of my friends was hit and the person very much could have killed people. So
the question in front of us is,
exactly,
would it make it less or more wrong depending on what happens?
I was also there, and I think it doesn't matter. I think it's the intent, and I think that in law, I think that I don't really know in my Latin phrases, but it's like you have to have the intent in some cases, and that's a big part of it.
Yes, exactly. And intention is, for Kant, the only way, the only area in which you can actually determine the morality of an action. Therefore, he starts with goodwill. So, the morality of the action is not what that action is. That might change according to circumstances, what that action is. So if you are, for example, doing the same action in different circumstances, it may or may not be considered to be moral or not. But what is always that has the capacity to be moral or not is why you are doing it. What is your will? What is your intention? Why are you doing what you are doing? Therein lies the morality of an action, not in the circumstance. So when you look at someone like, again, continuing with Bill Gates' example. Bill Gates gives $1 million to a charity. Is this a moral act? Now, Kant would say, first of all, that assumes that you can only be moral if you have $1 million. And since none of us have $1 million, you are readily excluded from the domain of being moral. Because, you are too poor to be moral, which is an extremely offensive and unacceptable consequence. But I would ask, why are you doing this? Now, you have the action and $1 million. That sounds good. I can qualify it moral. What if Bill Gates, no doubt, is doing that in order not to pay taxes? What if the reasoning behind his action is not the pure will of giving people money, etc., which in and of itself doesn't make the action moral either, but there is a reason, there is a will, there is a motivation of why he is doing what he's doing. And I'm sure most of you, actually all of you, would say, well, if he is doing that in order not to pay 5 million in taxes, then it is not only immoral, but it is, it's not only not moral, but it is morally suspicious. Because that 1 million can put him under 1 billion tax bracket, and then he can pay 5 million in taxes rather than 15 million in taxes. So if you give away $1 million, you can save $10 million. Is that moral? Or it is completely self-interested, selfish, immoral act? It's the same act. So if you look at the act, you cannot really know what it is in terms of circumstances. Similarly, if I'm driving my car into a crowd, I cannot control whether I'm going to kill anybody or not. The only thing that I can control as a human being and where the morality of my action lies is, why am I doing this? The reason. Now, of course, in terms of the law, criminal law, it makes a huge difference whether you killed somebody or not. But in terms of morality, it doesn't. So if you killed somebody, you'll be prosecuted as a homicide, but otherwise it is just like public disturbance, etc. Yes, in the criminal law, it makes a huge difference, the circumstances, but not in the moral law. The action is equally immoral, whether you killed somebody or not. Because the intention was to kill. That was the principle. That was according to which you acted. Whether that happened or not is not even you can control. And also, I need to know as a human being before the act whether it is moral or not. Otherwise, I have no basis upon which I can organize my actions. You don't say, well, let me shoot around, and if nobody dies, then it's probably moral. Or let me see whether if I do this, whether it's going to be moral. Do you say let me steal this or whatever, or let me kill this person, see what happens. Maybe it is moral, maybe it's not, I'm not sure. This formulation goes against the logic of moral thinking that you already have as human beings. So I don't have to teach you anything. I don't have to send you even to school. You should know English, that's necessary. But when I say something like that, what I'm appealing is your reason, not anything else. Your thinking, because it's logical. Because you think, yeah, of course. What does that even mean? Let me slap this person. If they fall down and die, then it's going to be an immoral act. And if they don't, it's going to be a great act. So I don't need to do anything to indoctrinate you to show the principle of this action. You don't need to be from a particular country, particular religion, particular, I don't know, like gender, etc. This is valid for all human beings. And everybody has the capacity to think that. Now, this is, according to Kant, the only way to ground morality. Therefore, it's called grounding for the metaphysics of morals. Now, some people believe that they ground morality on the basis of empirical circumstances or certain doctrines, certain religions, certain ways of thinking. That for Kant is both impossible, insufficient, but also slightly immoral. So when somebody says, for example, I'm a moral person because I'm Christian, I'm a moral person because I'm Muslim, or I'm whatever I am, right? Then what you are implicitly saying is that unless you are Christian, you can't be moral. If I get all my principles of morality from a particular doctrine, those people who don't belong to that doctrine cannot be moral. So you are technically excluding from those people from the possibility of being moral. But you are also doing something worse, because those people don't even have the obligation to act morally anymore, because your morality comes from your particular God-fearing religion. Well, I don't fear God. I don't have that religion, so I can kill you, because I don't have any obligation of morality. So it's a very strange thing that you are once excluding people from morality and you are doing injustice to them, but you are also justifying the possibility of them doing injustice to you, because they cannot be moral, because they were not born or raised or converted into a certain kind of religion. So for Kant, religion not only cannot, but should not, and if it does, it is dangerous to ground morality. Because it makes distinctions among human beings. It privileges certain people. It gives the possibility of morality to certain people and exonerates other people from the possibility of even acting morally. So you are both, in a bizarre way, contradictory. You are both obnoxious and self-righteous, but at the same time, victimize yourself. Because first you say you cannot be moral, then you must also say, oh, you don't need to be moral. So those people can. So you can say, well, if your morality is based on Christianity, since I'm not moral, I don't have an obligation to act according to those morals. So the only thing that all human beings have, regardless of everything, any circumstance, is reason. Therefore, this way of thinking actually literally grounds all our thinking about non-discrimination. Why should we not discriminate among human beings? Because we are all rational beings. Non-discrimination is not like a fancy principle that people thought about. It is a moral principle based in human rationality, that the circumstances, the race, the nationality, the gender, the sexual orientation, anything and nothing should make any difference in determining the morality of an individual. Only reason should. And if you, for some reason, incapacitated to think rationally, then we not only should not punish you, but we rehabilitate you. So if you are not rational enough to form an intent, a goodwill, we accept that, even in the criminal law. And we don't say that that's a discrimination, that it is wrong, etc. We say that human being has failed to be a fully rational human being because of circumstances. That's possible. And we accept that. And we should accept that because it is just. But if we do that on the basis of any other discriminatory category, that is wrong. If we do that, oh, you are a man, therefore you should get away with it. That's wrong. Oh, you are an American, maybe we'll give you a pass on this. Or if you are of a particular gender. These are all we know to be wrong because there is only one principle, according to Kant, that is universally valid for all human beings. And that is not just being a human being, but being a rational being. The capacity to think, the capacity to imagine, the capacity to look at something and say, this should not be the case. Because everything else in nature, according to Kant, happens according to laws. There's always reason. There's always a cause. Everything happens according to laws. And as far as empirical world is concerned, there is no possibility of morality. Everything is what it is. Animals kill each other. They eat each other. You don't go to animals and say, oh, you should not really have done that. Nobody goes into the jungle and say like, this lion, like, hey, lion, stop killing other creatures. That's really wrong. Or you don't really tell your cat, of course you do, but you shouldn't really, oh, you should stop scratching things. I mean, they do it because there's an instinct. That's a law of nature. They have to do it. Like, like it's actually kind of tyranny. We sort of tell dogs like, oh, you should not bark. But like, leave them alone. I mean, it inconveniences you, but they are following laws of nature. You shouldn't like teach them to behave like stupid human beings. Oh, I should not bark now. Otherwise I will be like punished or something like that. So only human beings have the capacity to act according to not laws of nature, but according to their own determination, their own will. So I determine your will, even though everything in me says, in terms of laws of psychology, laws of physiology, that I should really slap this person. I mean, they are in front of me, they are talking nonsense, they are stupid as far as I'm concerned, so I'm really angry, and all this like electromagnetic whatever is happening in my brain tells me like, hit him, slap him, shut him up. But I don't do it because as a human being, I have the capacity, not it's happening always, but I have the power, capacity, to say to those laws of nature, yes, I'm angry, but I'm not going to allow those angers to determine my action. I'm going to determine my action by my principles. Now, supposedly, if we attribute this capacity to other animals, we assume that they have reason too. They can act differently than they can. So you are somehow attributing to your dog the capacity to say, I want to bite this person, but let me not bite. They are doing it because they are afraid of something else. Usually you are sort of oppressing your dog when you train them because they are afraid of not getting the treat or they are afraid of being punished. Therefore, they choose one law of nature over another law of nature, but they are never acting according to rational principles. That is the goodwill. So, therefore, he says, only will can be good without qualification. That without qualification really means that independently of any spatio-temporal circumstance. All human beings have this capacity to act according to a law that they give to themselves rather than laws of nature. That's the basis of morality. Because everything that happens in nature is free of morality. We never judge nature according to laws of morality, and we shouldn't. Like it's raining now. It shouldn't have rained. Does that make sense? I mean, you might really want it not to rain, but rain, you should not have done that. You know that's ridiculous. Or, you know, the tree falls. It's like, oh, I love that tree. It should not have fallen. Like, that's bad. You don't attribute this kind of should, ought, different. The tree fell because it was dead, because that's nature. It's inescapable. And everything in nature, nothing in nature can be the basis of morality, because it is what it is. It is never what it should be. I mean, in other words, like what it should be, it actually is. What should be and is cannot be in tension. Therefore, it is law of nature. So, goodwill is according to which we can say that action is moral. Now, human reason, according to Kant, exists only in order to produce a goodwill. If I have rationality, if I have reason, the only thing that I can do is to produce goodwill without qualification, absolutely goodwill. Now, of course, why, he says, like, why do we have this thought? And that comes from our sense of duty. Namely, when you have a sense like, I should do something. Now, mostly that what should be the case, or what you consider to be duty, is an empirical thing. I should do my homework, I should, speak properly, I should not slap people, etc. All these kinds of duties that to attribute to yourself, that you do it whether anybody is watching you or not, or anybody knows it or not. You have a sense of an idea of duty. You should do something. Now, if you don't have that, you might be a psychopath, and then you might never have that sense at all, but that's a capacity of reason that you lack. And usually when we talk to people, I mean, we still kind of punish them, etc. But like if they have some kind of physiological conditions according to which they cannot reason, according to which they cannot think properly, and children, for example, we kind of not even punish them, even in criminal law. So like, if the same act is done by a 5-year-old and a 45-year-old, then depending on whether it's good or bad, you judge it differently. Because they have that capacity fully to determine their will, but children of 5 years don't have that. So that's the notion of what he considers to be the task of reason, to produce a good will, and it must be the basis of morality. Now, for Kant, if you do an act just for the sake of your duty, that you should do it, that's why when it's moral. So for example, he gives several examples. If you do something that is contrary to your duty, that you should not have done, and you do it, that it is wrong. But if you, for example, if you go to a store and the store owner charges everybody the same amount of money for every product. Why did they do that? Like, why is there kind of a morality, so to speak, or even like when, I mean, in terms of contemporary examples, why is Google interested in anti-racism, for example? Why is Amazon contributing to Black Lives Matter? Why are people trying to act morally?
So that people will like them more?
People like them more. I'm sure Google is not really interested in being liked, but you are right in principle that you continue to consume their products.
Probably competition.
Probably competition, yes. And you think you are going to sell more. Yeah. So you see a motivation behind it. So do you believe that they are moral acts? Are they doing it out of some sense of justice, duty, or something? So what do you think as a result? You get cynical. You get just like, oh yeah, Amazon, you are supporting Black Lives Matter because you want to make money out of Black Lives Matter paraphernalia. You have no interest in being anti-racist in the United States. It's just a good PR and actually will sell more products. Earlham College, you are doing anti-racist work. It's because you want to be able to advertise your school as the only anti-racist school in the country, which every other school is doing. Like everybody is so horribly racist except for us. That's our reputation. That's what we are doing certainly. Just like Google, just like Amazon. And if you discern that the motivation behind the act is ultimately self-serving, then you start questioning the value of that act, as you should. So your immediate inclination is actually to sort of, actually you will think like Google shouldn't even care about these things because they should just sell their products and they should be completely immoral or ruthless in doing those acts. But as you said, they get smarter, so they have indirect inclination. So they say, well, if I do this, yes, I might be able to sell a number of products now, but in the long run, my reputation is going to be hurt. So this is a long sort of, I need to have a reputation. People need to think in a certain way about me so that they have a proper image about me. Therefore, I am doing this. That still has no moral worth whatsoever. It is just PR. It is just perception. And also, you know, if somebody does something in order to look good to other people, then you also, through moral reasoning, hopefully think, well, this is not really moral. This is just for the sake of appearances. This is just in order to give the right image. And when I personally look at the United States, why many people are doing what they are doing it in order to give the right message to other people about their self-perception. Perceive me this way. I need to be perceived that way. I need to give that impression to people. And it is not like I have never spoken to you in the past about this, but we all, I think, at least agree in principle that when people act on the basis of these motivations, they are not really what they say they are. They just want to appear to be that way. And it becomes incredibly difficult in contemporary society to be implicated in a system, to take all the advantages of a system and then turn around and say, oh, I don't like this system. That's when you want to appear to be moral, which is the worst thing, in actually committing acts that are not moral. And that hypocrisy not only hurts our sense of justice and morality, but it also makes us cynical towards moral principles. Then we tend to say, oh, nobody cares, or nobody can think about this. Nobody is actually genuine. Nobody is authentic. So what Kant is trying to say, you are the only one who can know the authenticity and the motivation of your actions. Morality is not within the realm of visibility. So forget about role models, forget about like wonderful citizens, etc. They are all doing that for their own sake. They are doing it in order to appear and give the impression in a certain way. There you cannot find morality. That's just the domain of show. And you know that. I mean, I hope you know that. I hope none of you base your criterion of morality on what Google or Amazon or Bill Gates is doing, or any other person for that matter. Because deep down, you know that you really don't know why they are doing what they are doing. You never have access to the reasons of the people why they are doing that you are doing. But to me, it appears pretty transparent when Bill Gates gives $1 million and I find out that he actually evaded 10 million paying in taxes. And I would say, forget about charity. I don't need your charity. Go do what your duty is, which is paying the taxes. That's your duty. I will maybe not know that, but then I would consider your actions to be moral. Why doesn't anybody say, you know what, I'm not going to give this impression of I'm a charitable person. I'm actually going to do what I'm supposed to do, which is not give $1 million to charity, but pay $100 million to the taxes. Then, well, then I'll say, okay, maybe your motivation is slightly more honorable than your motivation of giving $1 million and purchasing this public PR image. So by making morality related to the will, he is actually really appealing to our sense of, if something tries too hard to appear to be moral, in fact, they are probably hiding something immoral. Because morality cannot be really seen. And if they try to make it visible, they are trying to paint an image. And I believe this principle, and I really use this principle implicitly, explicitly, on the basis of a lot of people who are showing on Twitter, Facebook, wherever, how they actually are morally. They give a moral posture. That moral posture is usually a cover-up for a sense of immorality that they are feeling. And it's not our job, and it's not anybody's job to make other people feel morally relaxed or comfortable. Like, oh, you are okay. You are not actually as bad as other people. That's all I want to hear. That has nothing to do with morality. That's my ego. That's my self-perception. That's the way in which I want to understand myself. But it's not moral. It's an image. An image almost always corrupts and somehow perverts the sense of morality. That's why I hope when you get these beautifully worded memos from various administrations or schools or companies, etc., it's like, we really care about each worker, we care about non-discrimination. No, you don't. Precisely because of that, you say that, because I know what you are doing as opposed to what you are saying. And all the things that you are doing for reasons that are problematic, while at the same time you are trying to control those reasons by discourse. And that is the most damaging, because people who have the proper discourse appearance through discourse actually hurt the morality of principles the most. Because they say one thing and do absolutely the opposite. And Kant is really the sort of last possible appeal to a kind of universality according to which we might be able to treat all human beings equally because they are rational. Because we are so obsessed about our differences, so obsessed about our uniqueness, as opposed to, in the process, we are also undermining the possibility of a morality that might be valid for all human beings. So by emphasizing our differences, which there are many, nobody is denying them, we are really not trying to find a unifying point. Now, even the unifying point can be actually dividing. Most unifying points are actually dividing. Like, whenever we say we all Americans should be unified, which means we should exclude all the people who are not American. Like, every unifying principle that is empirical, that comes from the historical circumstances, really separates us. Maybe if it can't, this is the only last possible common ground for all human beings: rationality. We are all potentially, regardless of our nationality, history, gender, ethnicity, nothing that would discriminate us from each other in terms of rationality. Now, of course, Kant has been criticized that this rationality actually for Kant is a particularly European, historical, etc. So there is a critique of that. We will come to that. If you take my post-colonial theory, I criticize Kant on the basis of that, etc. But there is also a possibility that maybe this is the last philosophical attempt to find something common for all human beings that would ground morality. And even if it doesn't, it's still quite useful to think, because it allows you to see all the things that are happening in society in the name of morality and how horribly immoral they are. And it's hypocritical, and they try to appear in a certain way, and you know that it's not authentic, it's not real, it's fake. It's fake. And it undermines our belief in morality. Forget about our belief in institutions, but even undermines our belief in morality. And then it creates this kind of false disappointments. Like, oh, I really believed that the institution was moral and ethical, but it isn't. Oh yeah, well, it was stupid of you to believe that, because that institution always protected its own interest. So I was in a meeting at the faculty meeting at Earlham a number of years ago, which was really quite telling. So we were sort of talking about how Earlham can contribute to the community that it is in. By the way, I hope you are aware of the fact that Earlham is not economically contributing at all to the community in Richmond. Somebody says, but in order to be able to do good acts, we need to survive. We need to exist. So our primary goal is self-interest, to survive as an institution. All these other values that we market ourselves in terms of like peace, justice, I want to ask the people, in order to bring peace and justice, would you give up Earlham College as an institution? Is the principle that you seem to be serving bigger and more important than your self-interest or not? If not, you are simply using those slogans and principles in order to market yourself rather than genuinely, authentically serving those values. This is the ultimate criterion for any authentic being. Would you sacrifice your own self-interest for the values that you are articulating, or are you using those values in order to glorify your own self-interest? It's very simple, actually. Amazon can do a lot of good to the entire world by dismantling itself. And it should not be that difficult to do. Like, if it just sort of like liquidifies all of its assets and then distribute to the entire world. That would be, I would consider them almost potentially moral. I would love it. So if somebody can do that. If somebody says, we are selling all the products of Earlham College and contributing to Black liberation in the United States, I would totally be on board with that as a moral act. But we will never do that. So all we are doing is some kind of a exercise in self-promotion. Okay, this is a little bit class, a little bit ranting. Sorry about that, but I think the circumstances allow me to do that. So we'll continue. Kant, any questions, any comments, any complaints? No, you want to go? It's 11:10. You are bored. I didn't promote myself properly. Okay, we'll still have a lot to talk about up to page 17. I'll go, but the second section is about 14, 15. Yeah, second section is long. So please read up to page 36 or so. Like 35, 36, so 15 or 16 pages, so that we have like roughly the same amount of. So I'll start with first section and then continue, but we might get to section 2. So read it. If you have questions and if you don't understand the text, I know most of you didn't read it today, so that's why I was kind of ranting, because you have your papers, etc. But please read the first 17 pages plus 16 pages or so for Thursday. Okay, I'll try to get back your papers back to you before next Tuesday or by next Tuesday. Okay, I'll see you on Thursday. We'll still meet at 8:30. So, okay, bye.